Churches are in the midst of some change, and part of the change comes from sort of an understanding that maybe the church isn't addressing the needs of today. And so in this series on marriage, I want to address something that maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago would have been forbidden. And yet it is such a part of who we are and what it means to be in marriage that I want to address it. And so the topic today is romance and sex in a marriage. And I realize that there is a large gap between the ideal and the real. Some of you know that when Paula and I were married in 1994, we left Owensboro, headed toward Hilton Head for our honeymoon. But we decided to stop in Gatlinburg for the night and have our time there because we both love Gatlinburg. And that night it snowed about 23 inches. Snowed in Gatlinburg for your honeymoon. Doesn't that sound wonderful? McDonald's was closed for 3 days. They couldn't get food or workers in or out. So the only problem was a few days into our honeymoon, we received a telephone call that a pipe had burst in the attic of our home and had run down into the basement, causing about $10,000 worth of damage, and the children and the sitter were there. And we couldn't get home. I mean, when Friday, we got married on a Saturday, on Friday when we came home, I think we were the first ones on the interstate between Bowling Green and Owensboro because the interstates were closed down. It's a little hard to have a honeymoon when you know your house is damaged that much and the children are there. There's a large gap between the ideal and the real of being married. But today what I want to do is I want to talk to you what the Bible says about sex. Because it is addressed in there many times in many ways. And if we understand what the ideal is, and we allow God's ideal of what it means to be in a marriage and to have the sex life a married couple should have, I believe it will help all of us. And if not you personally, I would be willing to bet there is someone you need to help. Because there are so many scars in our society. God created sex. God invented it. God thought it up. The Bible says in the book of Genesis, then God made a woman and brought her to the man. This is it, Adam exclaimed. The man and the wife were both naked, but neither were embarrassed or ashamed. If you were to take the Hebrew and translate it literally, here's what it would say. Hey, what is this? Where have you been all my life? God created sex. And there are 3 reasons why we were given sex. Number 1, to provide unity. And you can see in your program there's an outline if you want to jot some notes down. But number 1 is to provide unity. It is a physical expression of spiritual and emotional truth. 5 times the Bible says, and the 2 shall become one. Sex is far more than a physical act. It has profound and emotional complications and implications, and it brings unity to a marriage. Secondly, it's to provide enjoyment. God gave us sex for mutual pleasure. Sex is a gift, and it is to be honored. And then third, to produce children. The first command God gave us was, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And it seems that's the only one some of us ever get right. The sad truth is that there are many couples that only the third benefit is part of their marriage. And so today I want to give you 3 biblical truths. And there's a lot more, but just today I want to give you 3 to focus on God's understanding of sex for you and I. So number 1, it's to cultivate healthy attitudes. Cultivate healthy attitudes. Unfortunately, it's easy to get the wrong attitude about sex in our society. We pick sex up on the schoolyard, through the newspaper, through television, through movies, through bad experiences, through parents, through areas we grew up in. I remember when my father set my brothers and I down and said, okay, boys, it's time we talk about sex. And so we said, well, Dad, what would you like to know? Unfortunately, that was the end of the conversation. We don't have time to look at all the things, but some of the verses I want to give you, are 4 of them are, the first one is from 1 Timothy 4:4. The Bible says, for everything God created is good, and nothing is to be rejected, but all is to be received with a prayer of thanks. The Bible says everything God created is good. And does that include sex? Yes. It includes our sexuality. But I need to be clear today that men and women are not equal when it comes to this. Because women are better at being women than men. And men are better at being men than women. God created us different. God created us to be together. God made us to be who we are. So sex is not sinful. It's not even evil. It is the perversion of sex, the misuse of sex, and the abuse of sex that is wrong. We should accept it without guilt and without shame. But sometimes there's so much shame and guilt surrounding it, it's confusing. The Bible says that lovemaking between a husband and wife is a sacred activity. Hebrews 13:4. Honor marriage and guard the sacredness of your sexual intimacy between a husband and wife. It's not dirty, it's holy. And that's why it's reserved for a marriage, because that's the way two people come together as only they can in a marriage. You know, when I was a teenager, I thought I had all this stuff figured out. Now, looking back after many years of marriage, I realize it's a mystery of what it means to become one, to understand the way God wanted it between husband and wife. People miss so much of what God has for them in terms of enjoyment because they don't understand the oneness in a marriage. A few years ago, Red Book did a study on sexual satisfaction, not the most Christian publication, and yet here's what they wrote. The greater the intensity of a woman's spiritual convictions, the more likely she is to be highly satisfied with sexual pleasures in her marriage. Sexuality and spirituality go together. They are meant to be together and celebrated. The most sexually fulfilled women were the most spiritual, and that's the way God wanted it. But part of the problem is, even in Christian homes, we teach it wrong. We say sex should be no, 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 instead of wait, wait, wait. I have had several people say to me, you know, all my life I was told sex was bad. I come up in front of people in a church, get married in 15 minutes, and then it's okay? How do you throw that light switch? You don't. And that's why we need to teach our children. It's not no, no. It's wait, wait until that special person comes along.